Hey, historian lovers. Tonight's story is one that sleeps beneath snow. It's quiet, woven into wool and whispers. But it's not forgotten. We'll go back centuries, into a frozen medieval village. You'll see how families huddled together in shared beds, how fire was sacred inside a cold stone cottage, and how sour bread and silent prayers helped people last through the longest nights. You'll learn how layers of cloth were blessings, why people had two sleeps instead of one, and how laughter returned with masks, music, and midwinter fire, even when food ran low and frost clung to the windows. If that sounds like the kind of journey your heart needs, make sure you like this video and subscribe for more gentle storytelling. But most dear to me, comment below and tell me where you're listening from. It's magic when I see your messages. Someone in America, someone in Europe, someone in Asia, all of us gathered here beneath the same quiet star. Now close your eyes and let's begin the story. The first frost, when the cold begins. There's the heavy hush that settles in a chapel before vespers begin. The kind of quiet that smells like beeswax, old wood, and the slow drift of incense smoke. There's the hush inside a library built before printing presses, lined with chained books and fading vellum that no one dares to touch. And then there is the silence of first frost. It's a different kind of stillness, a kind that feels as if the very bones of the earth have gone quiet, listening, watching, perhaps even holding its breath. And it is in this kind of hush, on an unremarkable morning in a forgotten village, somewhere in Europe, long before we gave borders names, that our story begins. No, frost comes more gently than that. Soft, even tender in its descent. It moves like a whispered warning on the wind. A tinge in the breath, a silver shimmer on the thatch in the morning. The sun is late to rise these days. It peaks only faintly above the treetops, pale as honeyed milk. And when it finally touches the rooftops of the rambling little hamlet curling beside the woods, its warmth scarcely lingers. The first frost has come, not loudly. It doesn't ride in on a blizzard or howl like wolves through chimney flues. To the villagers, it means only one certain thing, and she's just as often called Els with the Crook because she walks with one. Her house sits closest to the woods, nestled beneath a lean old oak that groans when it snows. She slips from her pallet of straw and wool and nudges the coals from the hearth, small orange eyes peeking from a sea of ash. She's known for gathering herbs long after others have hung up their baskets for the year. And this morning, her shutters frost over from the inside. Winter has sent its first letter. Even the animals begin to change, fluffing, thickening, growing still. The sheep no longer bleat so cheerfully in the meadow. The crows grow bold, watching from fence posts. The goats press close to the walls at night, drawing near to the heat of the stones where the sun once kissed. There is a woman in the village. Her name is Elsa, though names change quite easily in these times, and hoof and wooden wheels, still lingering there even as the grass turns to brittle yellow. She wakes not to sound, but to cold. Every time the wind leans against the house, she counts to 12, holds tight the iron pot, and listens for the ghosts of last winter. The kind that creeps beneath the thatch, slows the movement of hands, and makes every joint feel older than the body it lives in. She does not speak, not yet. Words are for warmer mouths. Instead, she listens. She listens to the squeal of the frost-split boards, to the thunk of the water bucket beside the door, frozen to the surface. She opens her door slowly and breathes in the sky. It tastes like stone and wind, like iron gathered from riverbeds. And she says, simply, "It's here." This is how medieval people knew the seasons were changing, not from dates or calendars, but from the land's own slow language. The breadstuffs are nearly finished. The last onions hang papery in the rafters. The wind no longer smells like mud. By now, the villagers have drawn up tight into themselves. Not miserably, not in panic. Children are sent to gather pine cones dropped near the old chapel ruins. Some young men string nets for birds too slow to flee. The women begin curing garlic cloves strung like beads, but with the patience of people who have known this before. In the center of the village sits a square of bare, tamped earth. Trampled by generations of Boots children, rarely idle, leave tracks in the frost with their bare toes, laughing through their breath like little ruined dragons. The harvest is already long past, a chaos of threshing, drying, bundling, bleeding fingers. But what is gathered can only last so long. Grains must be hidden, apples must be watched, skins must be scraped and smoked, shoes stuffed tight with wool, mice must be kept from larders. And salt, oh salt, it must be gathered and kept close like a miser's gold, for though it can't feed you alone, it keeps hunger company. Their mother, a woman with rope-braided hair and cheeks scalded red from the wind, watches only briefly from her kettle of barley stirring in slow eights. Of course, there are no ghosts, not really, but in the medieval mind, winter often felt like a kind of spirit itself. Not cruel exactly, but old, deep, enduring, and the frost on the window, a sign of its gentle knocking. There are so many things to do. To survive the cold takes effort of a different kind. In these early frosts, there is a strange mix of quiet and motion. Villagers move slowly, dressing in layers even indoors, sealing wood slats with dampened clay, taping cloth to gaps in the doorframe. All the while, that thin frost lingers on the roofs as the sun crawls, golden and sluggish, across the sky. There's a superstition among the older women. They say if your first frost smells sweet, then the winter will be merciful. If it coats the north side of the chapel first, the pigs will fatten fine. If it curls on the roofs before it reaches the ground, well, that means snow is walking from the mountains, and she shall not be denied. Today, they tell each other, the frost has kissed eastward first, a sign perhaps that the wolves will come early this year. At the edge of the fields, long empty now, save for brittle stalks and owl droppings, stands the gleaning tree. It's a gnarled old thing, part ash, part memory, and come every frost, a wreath is hung from it, woven from dry herbs, leftover rye stems, and sometimes the heel of a loaf no longer soft. Elsa places it herself. She mutters no chant, only a soft, humming tune, the kind of wordless lullaby made for earth, not ears. What's it for? A younger girl once asked, picking at her fingernails through a hole in her mitten. To remind the fields, Elsa had said, that we do not forget them ... even in sleep. Later, as the pale sun slips down behind the trees and melts into that thin blue evening, the chill deepens. It's not cruel yet, not dangerous, but it carries the promise of worse. They are not miserable, not weeping. They are simply wintering, the way animals burrow, the way trees knot their sap, the way bears dream in their bones. Inside a crooked stone house, a family gathers. 5 of them, plus an uncle who speaks only when drunk and never opens his eyes after supper. There is rhythm in it, not despair, for winter in the Middle Ages was not about resisting, but enduring. On nights like this, sleep does not come easily. Firewood burns faster than memory, and the sound outside, the true silence of a frozen world, weighs heavier than snow. Evening begins before supper. One by one, they tuck into bed. But they do not sleep the way we do, not in 8-hour spirals, broken only by buzzing clocks and flickering screens. They sleep in segments, divided by the firelight and the frost. First sleep begins not long after dark. It's deep, dreamless, and often shared. Siblings curled together like kittens, old wool cloaks piled over feet, of stories, of voices drifting like smoke in the rafters. Time moves differently in it. Then they wake. Not fully. Just enough to stir the coals, pee into the cold pot, whisper a soft word to a woken child. And then, second sleep. It gathers in the hoofprints left before sundown, preserving them like memories in the dirt. That's the sleep of dreams. And so they rest, even as the first winter night deepens around them, and the frost thickens just a little more on the thatch above. Outside, the frost continues its quiet work. It creeps along the branches of the hawthorn, dusts the blackberries, still clinging to the edge of the hedgerows. And above it all, the stars. Not one or two, but whole rivers of them, glinting through clear skies that only winter dares to polish so clean. The frost is not cruel. Not yet. There will be woolen wrappings and early sunsets, strange warming drinks made from ale and herbs, and shoes wrapped in scraps stolen from dead tunics. It is simply the messenger, somewhere in the heart of the trees, the warning. And they have heard it. In the weeks to come, there will be deeper cold. There will be hunger and ingenuity, and the old songs sung with slower tongues. But tonight, it is only beginning. And so the village sleeps, tucked in like children beneath the wide hand of the frostbitten earth, dreaming of fires still glowing, hearthside rituals and quiet flames somewhere, just beyond the hush of the frost-covered fields, behind walls of old timber, moss-chinked stones, and the prayer-thin gap beneath the wooden door. A fire stirs. It is not roaring. Not the bright, proud flame of feasts or festivals. It is low, the way a whisper might smolder in a quiet room. It sighs long beneath the blackened iron of the cooking pot, casting a slow dancing glow that paints the room in amber and shadow. This is the fire of home, in a place where winter has taken root outside, but has not yet been allowed to enter. And here we learn that surviving winter was never just about keeping warm. No, it was about gathering closely, not just in body, but in rhythm, in ritual, in the old and quiet magic of the hearth. In the same village where our tale began, where frost first kissed the rooftops and the sheep had grown still and the children traced their names in the window glass with fingers red from cold, there sits a modest home, layered with old moss and half-repaired wattle, patched with dried manure and clay, and lined inside with fleece rags stuffed between the slats, curving gently between the chapel and the muddy bend of a nameless stream. Its walls are thick not in the way of castles, but like bread is thick with grain. And at its heart, like a candle in the bone of a lantern, is the hearth. No two hearths were the same. Some were dug shallow into the dirt floor, lined with cracked fieldstone and ringed in ashes. A hard velvet blue, deeper than daylight, gentler than night, and whose fingers smell faintly of time, begins each day by pressing her fingers into yesterday's ash. The kind that hums just above silence, like snow waiting in the clouds. Others stood upright, raised slightly, so that the fire might sit off the chill of the ground, cradled like an altar. So she leaves just enough, and places a nest of dried grass and curled birch bark in its center. Little twigs snipped from hedges, gathered beneath the nettle bush. A breath, too, then the coal saved in linen, still clinging to its ember. Many had no chimneys, only a smoke hole in the roof, and so smoke curled lazily across the room before drifting up and out, varnishing the beams with centuries of soot. The rhythm, the slow, crackling heartbeat of another winter's morning. But it is more than that. But all were made for living, for enduring, for surviving, for being together. And in the long, cold months, the hearth became the village's second church. It is evening now. Talking comes slower in the cold. Thoughts move through woolen heads a little slower. And the world outside is blue with cold. The fire inside has been coaxed back to life. Not with matches. No, there are none in this century, after all, but with careful ritual touch. He pokes the logs gently, not to tend them, but out of habit. His fingers are wrapped around a carved stick, a simple piece of ash wood, and before long, he will take to whittling it again. Not for any purpose, just to pass the time by a warm edge. Elsa, the woman with the slight crook in her spine, who once whispered songs to the gleaning tree, she never wipes the hearth clean. And her yarn is wool from their own sheep. One carries a crust of bread, too hard to chew, but good enough to suck when warmed. Another clutches a stuffed rag. It looks like a puppet, or a saint, or maybe both, dyed weakly with onion skin. Faint orange, nearly beige, but to her eyes, still beautiful. Why would she? Ash, any wise woman knows, is memory. It holds heat by night and luck by morning. And it begins again, the day. At night, the hearth becomes a gathering place. Not just out of need, though of course, the heat draws them in. Chilled fingers outstretched, cheekbones thawing by the fire's slow breath. It is where life shrinks pleasurably into a circle. No long rows of pews, no wide market roads. Just the tight globe of light that the fire offers. An island of gold in a sea of black. One by one they come near. First, the father, a broad-shouldered man who once traveled to a larger town and still occasionally dreams in Latin, though he no longer knows what the words mean. Then the mother, she brings her spindle. A drop spindle tonight, because the spinning wheel is too large to position close. The children come last, barefoot, legs wrapped in stitched flannel, noses redder than wild rosehips. They do not speak at once, but eventually the words come. They speak softly, telling, once again, the stories that always circle back to the fire. It may be a local tale of the badger priest who cursed a man for turning the millstones too fast, or of the doomed knight who fell in love with a frost sprite and now sings in the trees every wind's dusk, or of Saint Kennel, whose bones bled flowers when he froze in the hills, and who still keeps shepherds safe by night if they leave a pinch of salt near the sheepfold. There is one story that Elsa tells only by firelight, one she heard when she was no more than 6, before she had taken up the keeping of flames in her mother's stead. It's of a fire spirit called Helwen. Helwen, she says, is no god, but not a ghost either. He is the soul of a hearth, kept alive not just by flame, but by attention. He likes things tidy. He likes things fed, both wood and story. If a hearth is neglected, or the coals are left to die without a whisper of thanks, Helwen withholds his heat. And on coldest nights, those who slighted him may find smoke curling back into their homes, or their kindling crumbling damp. They might even hear footsteps, just footsteps, shuffling by the ash pile after dark. But if Helwen is fed, with dry branches, with whispered thanks, with stories given to the flames, then he glows warmly, and the family stays well. It's a curious thing, how rituals grow around necessity. Some even named theirs, calling them things like Old Tongue or Saint Iron or Mother Svang, not out of play, but as protection, as companionship. In houses of few possessions, even tools remembered their names. The medieval peasant had no luxury of waste. Wood was burned carefully, kindling gathered daily from under hedgerows, or in some cases, dried dung from cows, shaped into chips and stacked tightly by the barn to cure. But even amid this economy of warmth, rituals emerged. Some tapped the hearth 3 times before setting logs. She was watching over the soul of the space. She was often the first to rise, the last to sleep, and the one most skilled at reviving limping coals with the breath of dried moss or knotted lint. Others marked a cross in the ash each night, a placeholder, a symbol that told spirits and neighbors alike that the home was clean and the fire mindfully kept. Set in the square or near a large stone once sacred and still honored. It was common to place a broom beside the hearth, not just to sweep, but as a kind of ward. Fires lit from the same root were believed to heat more kindly, and in some regions, every solstice, all fires were extinguished and then relit from a single ceremonial hearth, blessed by the oldest woman or the village priest. Dreaming beneath wool, patched with squirrel skins, and tucked at the corners with small stones heated in the embers. Keeping the fire was a sacred task. Whether old Tomas up the road has died yet, or if he'll survive another season out of spite, usually assigned to the eldest woman in the house, or left to the young girls on rotation. The firekeeper wasn't just tending embers. Many kept a special iron poker, passed down, rusted with time, and when the wind howled, and the snow pooled by the door, heavy and wet, it would carry into heaven, and the saints would forever know how to find them. When the chickens stopped laying, and the soup stretched thin over the week's end, and the taste of salted turnip became too bland to bear, the hearth still burned, a constant. A little sun made tame. Not every fire stayed inside. In some villages, especially nearer the old forests, the ones where trees still curled like words, not yet learned, traditions called for a village fire from this fire. Coals were taken back to each home, never lit entirely anew, but drawn like water from a central source. Shared heat, shared fortune. It was connection through combustion. And it meant that no spark was solitary. Back in our quiet home, the fire has dropped low again. Only a gentle red remains, like the last edge of sunset before full dark. The children have curled against one another, their breath soft and open-mouthed. The parents speak more now. Nothing fateful, just small things. Whether the goat is with kid, whether the lentils will last. The fire watches them all, like an old friend who does not speak unless spoken to. Not for show. Never for show. Little spoons carved with crescent moons. Dried lavender tied in knots of 3. Even the bone of a bird, once thought lucky, hung on a string to rattle when a storm approached. In one region far to the north, beyond the marshes and stinging bog grasses, it was said that if a child first spoke their name aloud by the fire, and so many mothers watched the fire closely, waiting for that first word, just in case it came too soft to hear. But in its place, warmth remains, echoing off the walls, stitched into straw bedding, breathing silently beneath the ribs of every dreamer curled close to someone else. This is what kept them alive, not just the logs, and not just the stone, but the care and continuity. The quiet rituals beside the flame. Layers of wool and winding cloth. There is something almost reverent about the act of dressing in winter. Not the rushed tug of sleeves done in haste or fashion. No, but that slow, measured gathering of cloth, one layer atop another, until a body becomes less skin and more memory. Wrapped in warmth, bent on enduring. Among the people of the old medieval village, the one tucked along the tree line near a stream, and sheltered beneath that heavy sky of sleep. Clothing was not merely wear, it was protection, it was tradition, and often it was a prayer in wool. Now the frost has settled fully. That sees its own breath. That sinks, not shouts. It's in the stone floors now, in the rafters, even in the bread, which cracks too easily at the crust. She stitched rosemary into the seams long ago, a habit her grandmother taught her for keeping away rots. Not one of those dancing night chills of early November, but the true deep cold, the kind that bites. Just enough so that when it touches her skin, it doesn't make her flinch. And so each morning begins with wrapping. Elsa, still up before the sun most days, begins by pulling a woolen shift from the hook near the hearth. It smells faintly of ash and rosemary. She sets the garment by the fire for a spell, just to warm the shoulders. Not too close, or it'll smoke. She pulls it on slowly. One hand, then the other. Linen first, then wool again. Layer by layer. She becomes cloaked in comfort, the way hills dress in snow. Not a single stitch is for show. The dress is homespun, dyed a muted brown with walnut shells 2 autumns past, nearly worn pale now at the cuffs. Beneath it, a shift of undyed linen, precious even if full of tears. Over it, sometimes an apron of heavier flax, wool leggings, a scarf wound twice about her neck. Little ones waddled beneath their wrappings like bundles of laundry, their arms near stiff at the elbows from the sheer bulk of it all. But they laughed. They didn't mind. Sometimes, dried hay is stuffed between layers for windbreak. There are no buttons, no fast zippers or flawless stitching. Ben washed in cold streams to rid them of dung and bramble, then dried across wooden lattice until they smelt less of the field and more of the season itself. Carding was noisy business, but rhythmic, calming in a way. Everything ties, wraps, tucks. Clothing is an act of labor, not lacing. In this village, and in many like it across this wide, old continent, warmth came not only from what one wore, but how one wore it. To survive the season, the villagers became layered beings, shaped by spinning wheels and slow hands. Children were dressed in hand-me-downs, so layered it was hard to tell where one garment ended and the next began. What couldn't be used by the household was sometimes traded: a ball of thick yarn for a wedge of cheese, or spun thread for rushes to light the dark corners of a low room. They called the thickest pairs of socks church feet, because only on church mornings were they ever warm enough not to ache. Wool was the gold of winter. She knots them tightly behind the knee, but not too tightly, so he can still run, still fetch eggs, still play at swords with woven sticks. The sheep gave it freely, though not easily. Shearing was done in warmer months, of course, with clipped fleeces wrung out like wet cloth. Then came carding, the act of drawing the fibers through wooden combs, whose teeth sang low songs as they worked. Next, spun into yarn, slow-turning, hand-twisted, or dropped on an old spindle while sitting by firelight. It was not fast work, but clothing rarely is when it's made by memory and hand. In Elsa's household, wool was fenced and guarded like a treasure long promised. Not all wool was equal. Thick wool wasn't always softer, and some colors held warmth better than others. One old woman swore that gray thread was warmer by 2 degrees, that even St. Cuthbert wore gray in the early months. Others whispered that fabrics dyed with madder root, the ruddy brown reds, held in luck and heat, and kept away death from cold lungs. Whether any of this was true hardly mattered. In medieval life, belief itself was a layer against the cold. There's a boy 10 years old, perhaps, who lives in the northernmost cottage of the village, nearest the peat bogs. Every morning, his mother ties sheets of wool around his legs, like a spiral that winds from ankle to thigh, binding them under his breeches. This morning, he asks if he can sleep with them on. Only if the hearth keeps, she says. If it dies in the night, even wool won't save your feet. And she's right, of course. These are boots made of rags, shoes stuffed with straw, cloth wrapped in blessings and hope, and maybe just a bit of sheep dung still clinging stubbornly to their threads. One might wonder, where then did fur come into it all? Not the soft white ermine of kings, nor the gleam of fox from noblemen's capes, but rabbit, badger, even squirrel. You could tell a fur's worth not by its symmetry, not visible to the eye, but there, a knot, tied deliberately, but by how many winters its warmth had lasted. For some, especially near the forests or farther north into colder kingdoms, fur was survival's luxury. In lean seasons, villagers wore small pelt capes stitched crudely at the seams, sometimes pieced from 7 or 8 animals at once. A grandmother might pass down a fur-lined hood, wool outside, rabbit skins stitched to the lining, where her mother had once stitched a prayer into the hem. To bind luck, to bind warmth. Children were often cloaked in hand-sewn caps that ended in a tail, sometimes with a twist of ribbon or scrap thread just to tether meaning, to bind love between generations. Many wore hoods, not hats, because a hood could be dropped to the shoulders when inside, but also wrapped double if the wind turned cruel at midday. Little things mattered. A strip of old cloth tied knotted around a wrist. A sewn pocket, not for coin, but to keep a warm stone, but to hold charms, twigs, a folded bit of dried thyme for luck, repaired again and again, until one garment bore the thumbprints of 4 generations' stitching hands, taken in at the sides, hemmed twice over as the family shrank with time, not grew, or remembering. A belt not of leather, but spun rope, strung not just to hold garments close. One girl in the village wore bells stitched to her ankle cuffs all winter, not to be heard, but to keep away frost spirits who, she insisted, feared tiny music. No one told her otherwise. And as the weeks of winter pulled slowly across the sky, like dragging cloaks across a stone floor, some clothing began to change by necessity. Sleeves would be widened to permit layering, felted thick, usually undyed, often still humming faintly with animal scent. Waistbands extended to make room for more under threads, and holes. So many holes, so that the weight of its stories didn't gather too greatly in the creases. A father might walk to church in a tunic that had once been his great-grandfather's, patched at the collar, but the most precious of all winter garments. Not for others, but for themselves, for the comfort of wearing a little warmth where fire could not reach. Was not a cloak, pounded, recarded into stuffing, used to seal the cracks of walls, or woven into crisis bandages for frost nips or coughs, nor a boot, nor even mittens drawn tight with waxed linen thread. It was the bedcloth, sometimes called a sleep shawl, or a night wrap, or simply the cloth. It was made heavy, was a quiet, worn-in victory repeated every day the sun returned, in a body still breathed beneath the layers. In homes where warmth was rare, this cloth would be spread across every sleeper at once, shared, sacred, unwashed, but shaken daily. As Elsa often said, to sleep beneath one cloth is to dream as one heart. And so, warmth was layered into the days, softly, without spectacle, without industry, every wrapping a thread of memory, every knot a quiet song against the cold. Some wore scent rings, tiny cloth pouches tied to their collars, filled with warming herbs like cinnamon bark, ginger root, bay leaf. And when garments grew too thin, they were not thrown away, they were shredded. Nothing was wasted. Every garment a chapter, every stitch an act of care. We often think of armor as iron, as gleaming plate or laced leather worn into battle. But in winter, in medieval winters, wool was armor, stitching was defense, and clothing. The church bell tolls at dawn. In the winter stillness, there are sounds that carry farther. The crunch of boots over old ice, the groan of a cartwheel that has frozen at the edges, the yawn of a beam settling deep in the belly of a house. And then, almost always the church bell. It tolls at dawn. Not a glorious pealing, not a melody bright and proud, but a single drawn note, like a sigh made of metal. Heavy as snowdrift, steady as the pulse of a wintering heart, the bell rings. And in the frost-bitten hush of early morning, before the bread rises, before the fire is stirred, before even the rooster dares to speak, and the villagers rise, the church sits at the village's center, or so it seems, though the fields are always shifting, the roads grow muddy and veer off, the woods encroach each decade like something remembering its own hunger. But the church remains still, a single-nave stone building, simple and sober, chiseled from local rock, mortared with lime in time, and brushed on one side with moss that turns silver in morning frost. Its windows are few, its roof thatched and repatched many times. The bell, more rust than bronze now, was cast long before any child alive had learned to say the word Amen. But the sound of it? It cuts through winter like a hot knife through lard. Most in the village do not attend church daily, not out of neglect, but because walking through waist-deep drifts is not a thing done lightly, or simply in snowlight too beautiful to ignore. The people come. But on special mornings, on feast days, on Saints' Eves, they come wrapped in their layers, coarse wool cloaks, hoods with frost still clinging to the fringe, boots stuffed with reeds, cheeks pink with the cold. They come slowly, their breath streaming behind them like ghosts that have finally learned to pray. Inside, the church is not warm. Hanging herbs dry above the altar, not for decoration, but to ward off illness. Juniper, rue, maybe a piece of lavender if some bold soul traded for it last summer. Not really, but it feels warmer. The air is still and dry heavy with the soot of old candles, the soft rot of stone, and the fine spice of bodies that have known many winters. The benches are narrow and splintered, the altar cloth stitched with initials, not of saints, perhaps, but of grandmothers. In the far corner, a statue of St. Bridget leans, smooth with the oil of 100 fingers touching her feet, her arms, her eyes, asking. And over it all, the rituals. Rituals older than the stone beneath their boots, older than the bell. Perhaps in some ways, older than Rome. The priest is a quiet man. His voice is not born for echo. They know the music of it, but for murmurs, for candlelight confessions, for the blessings given before a child is born, or gently as someone gasps their final breath and returns to sleep. In winter, he wears 2 robes, one wool, one linen, and sometimes a patchwork scapular that came as a gift from another village, far to the south, where winters are said to whisper rather than bite. When he speaks the Pater Noster, the people do not always understand the Latin, but they know its rhythm. They bow their heads and whisper their own versions, part prayer, part custom, part memory of their parents doing just the same. Faith in the medieval winter wasn't always one of fire. It was one of ice, of patience in the dark, of listening for answers in the silence between verses, of hope not for miracles, but for bread to last the week, for the thaw to come again, for the bell to toll another morning. The church became more than a place, nor even the saints in their niches. It became a pattern, a rhythm, a heartbeat beating beneath the snow. Elsa has never taken to kneeling easily. Her knees ache, have done for decades, and even the straw cushions some devout woman donated many years ago do little to soften the blow. But still, she bows her head, knee to knee, shoulder to shoulder, exchanging glances, passing infants wrapped like loaves in worn linen blankets. The choir doesn't sound clean, but close, not to the priest, but to the memory of all the winters survived before this one. For each candle lit by children with fingers blue from cold, for each cracked sandalwood bead passed between trembling thumbs, for each voice raised, raw and off tune, as they sing the opening line of a hymn with a name no one quite recalls. On feast days, the church becomes a place of warmth truly, not because the air is different, or the fire is fuller, the hearth at the back is just decorative, after all, but because there are bodies, bundled tight. And when the priest waves the censer, oak chips and dried yarrow smoldering in its base, they breathe in as one, faith and smoke and the subtle perfume of something ancient and sweet. In the back pew, a young girl named Agnes sits with her grandmother. "Why do we come when it's cold?" she whispers, her eyes focused more on her boots than the Mass. Her grandmother says nothing for a long while. Then, in a voice creased with age but soft as feather down, she replies, "So that God knows we're still watching his seasons." Agnes doesn't understand. Not all the way, but she takes her grandmother's hand and cups it to her cheek. And in that small gesture, a prayer is made. Outside the church, a thin trail of blessed salt rings the foundations. They say it keeps away ill weather, or precise devils, or rats, depending on who you ask. In truth, it's just salt, old and grainy. But the laying of it, done quietly, at first frost, just after Michaelmas, is a ceremony left from an older time still, when farmers whispered over their doorways, and bled hens as offerings beneath lintels, and the lines between Christ's world and the old green gods were not so cleanly drawn. Here, in winter, faith and folklore sleep in the same bed, and neither one asks the other to explain. It's no secret that cold is cruel to the poor. But the medieval mind didn't see the church only as sanctuary. It was sustenance in other ways as well. Sometimes, leftover loaves were left beside the door in winter, not from wealth, but from want shared. Bread heels dipped into wine dregs and passed to the meek, not in hope of healing, but in hope of dying warm. A small piece of beeswax given to a mother with a blind child who feared the dark. Sometimes, a pot of thin stew shared from the monastery kitchens would be ladled just a bit farther. Even the sick, those coughing hard with winter pneumonia, their breath rattling to the rhythm of old, forgotten psalms, were brought near to the altars. And always, there is music. Not polished choirs with golden sopranos and perfect pitch. No, here, in this village, in this breath-frosted time, music sounds more like memory. Slow, purposeful, a chant that drips candle wax. One morning, Elsa joins in again for the first time that season. Her voice cracks early, but she sings anyway. Not loudly, not beautifully, but as though some part of her aches with the silence kept too long. The bell tolls again. The mass concludes. The villagers unfold limbs from prayer, stretch their hands, pat one another's shoulders, and move slowly, as if reluctant to face the cold again. Outside, the sky is brighter now, still white with breath, but lighter at the edges. The smallest bird calls out once, like a question, and so they go. Back to their homes, back to the hearths, back to the scraps of root vegetable and skins of warm wool. But in them now, a fragment of light, not firelight, but that other kind. It's Latin frayed into bedtime rhyme. In the days that follow, the rituals continue, not always in church, but inside hearts shaped by it. A prayer muttered into porridge, a cross drawn in flour on the baking board, a lullaby that once was a hymn. And when death comes, and yes, even in the calm of story, we must nod to it, it is met not with screens, but with scripture. The soul, after all, is just breath. And to breathe it out in peace, with a candle lit beside you, and your name intoned by your kin, is, they believe, its own salvation. So the church bell tolls again and again, rung each morning by the priest, or in his absence, by any hand willing to climb the steps with care. It rings for Christ, for warmth, for the old gods who once ruled the frost, for the children who do not yet know the saints' names, but recognize the smell of incense before breakfast. It rings for order in a world shaped by chaos, and for love, the slow kind, wrapped in wool and whispered beneath heavy breath, for hope, like prayer, quietly kept in the heart, glowing like embers under ash. Bread, roots, and fermented things. There is an old rule in villages that live beneath snow. Let the fire stay warm, and the pot never empty. It isn't really a rule, not like the ones carved in stone above churches or shouted by kings. But it is followed, lovingly, faithfully, because in the long winter, with cold pressing at every crack in the wall, and the sky offering little more than gray silence, the belly becomes a temple. It is from here, from stew pots and crumb eels, from dried leaves and tubers slept beneath the soil, that hope is ladled. Food for the medieval peasant was not always plentiful, but still it was ritual. And ritual like prayer, keeps the body steady. In the quiet village hugged by trees and sealed for the season by frost, the mornings begin with the bread crust. Hard, dense as clay, dark from rye or black wheat. Aged not days, but sometimes weeks, kept high on shelves to protect from mice. These loaves are no longer bread as we know it. They are hammers, wedges, twice-baked stone pillows of survival. But when warmed by steam or dunked into something soft, they become enough. Made from coarse rye flour and a bit of the dark starter she's kept alive in a clay pot for, well, no one quite remembers how long. Elsa's hands are always busy in the morning. Today she was flattening a scrap of dough saved from 2 nights before. A remnant of yesterday's meal. The starter bubbles faintly. Alive, like something half-tamed, half-wild. She feeds it with a whisper of ale, a flake of bran, and breathes over it softly, as was taught. Some say you should name your sourdough, that the yeast listens, that it shapes itself to your voice. Elsa never named hers, but she hums to it, always in minor keys. Tomorrow's bread depends on today's breath. The cold bites it, the damp rots it. So most bread is rye, or barley, or a blend of whatever was salvaged and ground before the frost took root. There is little wheat in this village. It doesn't grow well in the heavy soils. Sometimes acorns are milled and mixed in. Sometimes old beans. Whatever can stretch the dough without poisoning the gut. No flour is white. No crumb is soft. Water is heated on the hearth. Learned hands know the heat without measuring. If it burns the wrist, too hot. If it wakes the chill from the fingers, just right. But the loaves turn brown and yield to the knife, as long as the starter is strong and the hunger is honest. To make the bread is to remember. Kneading is slow, done against the work table, rubbed smooth beneath tired elbows. Salt, perhaps a pinch, if any remains. Elsa mutters while she mixes, not curses, not spells, just memories. Names of people who taught her this. Names of the old goats. A song once taught by a peddler from the city. Words that mean nothing, but carry weight, like stones in the stew, meant to trick the pot into seeming fuller. The loaves are set to rest near the hearth, not too close. The heat might kill the starter, just near enough to rise like dreams, slow, persistent, small victories. Later, the smell will wake the children, but before that, there is soup. Of course, always soup. The soup is less a recipe than a confession, a whisper of what remains, a memory of green things, now dried and crumbled into flake. In the pot today, a carrot, shriveled but bright. It is medicine, more than food. A tongue on the tongue to balance the fatigue in the limbs. 2 parsnips, sweet beneath their tough skins. A handful of barley, rinsed twice. A scrap of old lard, left over from slaughter season. And, from a cloth-wrapped jar, the last of the fermented cabbage. This cabbage, heavy with sourness, crackles beneath the knife. It is sharp with garlic, with thyme, with salt stuffed into its heart until it wept and transformed. The children make faces when it steams, but they eat it. They always do, because what is sour today may keep death at bay tomorrow, and the body learns to love things that protect it. Fermentation in this world is a kind of trust, a way of believing that what seems ruined now, too soft, too sharp, too strange, might become a gift in time. Elsa keeps old jars under her bed, some lined with waxed linen, others corked, sealed with tallow or wax. Inside, scraps and leftovers, slowly becoming treasures. Apples turn to vinegar, cabbage turned to kraut, milk gone thick and strange, now poured over stale bread with a dash of honey. Even drink tells its story in quiet sips. No filtered water here, no tea with sugar, but fermented ales, thin and mild, or mother's milk in wintertime. Brewed in barrels behind cottages, stirred with clean sticks, flavored with hedgerow hops, or even bitter herbs. These were drinks for warmth, for digestion, for nightfall settling into the belly soft, not sharp. Children drank them too, the lowest beers barely stronger than soup, all part of the rhythm of winter. Water might freeze, but ale keeps singing through the frost. And what of feasting? Well, feasting changes its clothes in the cold. There are few grand tables, no roasted game for most, no glistening sugar fruits, nor golden pies. But still, there is joy. On St. Lucy's Day, Elsa bakes pea bread, filled with mashed yellow peas and scented with rosemary. It's lumpy, strange, but special. On the last Thursday before Nativity, the children roll leftover chestnuts and ash and pretend they are coins, laughing as they crack them beneath the hearth bench. Sometimes a neighbor brings dried mushrooms in a cloth, brown as tree bark, but rich when stewed. And these offerings become celebrations. With enough story, even porridge can be a feast. They say the root cellar is where the real treasure lives, buried deep near the woods, covered by turf and lined with stone. It yawns beneath the surface, like a secret remembered only in the cold. Here the foods sleep: turnips, onions, beets wrapped in straw, cabbages, whole, suspended from rafters in nets made of old skirts, apples blushed with age, a bucket of buried eggs, kept in ash to preserve them. It is cold there, but not frozen. And when a family opens its mouth wide to the winter winds, the cellar offers a whisper of autumn's whisper and the promise of someday spring. Meal by meal, a season passes. Bread made, bread eaten, roots chopped, broths brewed, spoons passed hand to hand. Nothing is wasted, nothing forgotten. Bones are saved for tools, grease for soap, bright as morning, cracked into soup and split 6 ways. Even stale crusts are fed to hens, who in turn might give 1 egg, just 1 egg, the yolk like sun on the tongue. By the end of the day, the table is simple again, cleaned with warm cloths, scented faintly by salt and thyme. The pot stays near the hearth, not emptied, but waiting, because no pot should sleep alone in winter. The children pick their teeth with little twigs. Elsa ties a cloth over the breadboard. The remaining loaf is heavy, dense, but it will keep, and they will eat. Again, another day, another bowl. Quiet gratitude served warm. Survival is not always sudden. Sometimes it's a spoonful at a time. Sometimes it's the scent of barley and onion weaving itself into stories told by firelight. Sometimes warmth doesn't come from flame. It comes from chasing steam with your face and knowing it's meant for you. They slept in twos. Darkness comes early in the cold months, but it does not pounce. It spills, thick and slow like wax, like syrup, a hush that pours itself across the rooftops, slides along the frozen earth, and settles inside the seams of every home, until there is no more day, only the rhythm of firelight and shadow, of rest, of remembering. And though sleep is the final task of the day, it is never hurried. In the Middle Ages, when lamps flickered and logs smoked, and even the moon stayed hidden behind the wool of the night sky, sleep was a ritual too. And in winter, the people slept differently. They slept together. They slept in twos, and often 3s. In a crooked little house that backs onto the frost-bitten rye fields, the hearth has finished its work for the night. The pot has been licked clean of barley, clothes set on pegs, boots turned upside down, and slowly, one by one, the family moves toward sleep. One low-ceilinged, yellow-smelling room with rushes on the floor and patched wool clothes dangling near the rafters, hung there to dry in the last of the heat. Not toward bedrooms. There are none, really, just one room. The bed is not a full bed either, but rather a large wooden frame filled with straw, stuffed with rags, perhaps lined with old woolen cloth, made heavier with each season. And into it they all go. First, the eldest. But sleep is earned tonight, as it is every night, and she pulls the sheep-felt blanket over her legs like a prayer. Her hands curl around the heated stone brought in from the hearth, still faintly warm, like the memory of a hand. The grandmother checks the hens in the lean to be sure no fox has crept near, facing it, always listening, always guarding. Her body aches with each movement. The knees creak. The hips complain. Then the children. 2 of them. One sneaks in with bare feet. The other drops in all at once with a noisy sigh. They giggle. They're promptly hushed. Next, the mother. The other between her knees, absorbing the last of their warmth, the way walls absorb fire. But more than that, you stay known. Her breath smells faintly of sour ale and sage. She tucks one child beneath her arm, but for company. Finally, the father. Last, because he checks the door, checks the fire. He lies near the edge. This is the winter bed, the one brought on by a fire as farewell breath and the aching of joints long at work. It arrived so steadily that many didn't remember it beginning. Just enough to roll over, to check the coals, to whisper, to listen for wind or wolves or angels. This is how they sleep. There is no privacy, no silence except the collective kind, no walls between sleepers, but the shape of bodies. They sleep in 2s or more, not only for heat, for safety, for familiarity. You stay warm, yes. There is comfort in the measured breaths of the ones you love. Others called it the gap. In the way, garments scratch against skin. In the uniquely human noise of quiet dreaming, dreams were remembered, prayers spoken aloud. She lifts her head and hums, almost inaudibly, like a song forgotten, but not gone. A piece of bread, sometimes eaten. A child consoled from troubled sleep. And in medieval life, dreaming was no idle thing. Sleep came in parts. First, the long, slow descent. First sleep. This was the heavy one. And then, after some hours, a stirring, not to wake fully. Second sleep would come after. But in between the two was the secret hour. Some called it the watching hour. It was when minds wandered. In winter, the gap between sleeps became a place where life breathed gently in the stillness. Elsa remembers the stories best during that middle hour, when blackness lies heavy outside and only a coal or 2 keeps company in the hearth. And she remembers. She remembers her mother reciting verses in the dark from a book they no longer owned. She remembers the tale of the woman who wove dreams into the linens of her dying son, so he could find his way to heaven without fear. She remembers a boy she once loved who whispered to her between first and second sleep, and vanished with the last snow of that year. Some beds were made of straw laid straight on floors. Others were platforms, lifted slightly above the cold ground, stuffed with hay, and topped with anything heavy enough to keep the warmth inside. You could hear them, shaking as people adjusted, crackling as straw shifted, a chorus of sleep instruments, the rustling of being alive in winter. Infants often slept swaddled tightly, wrapped in linen, then in sheepskin, laid inside basket cradles, or even drawers tucked near the bed's edge. But even babies were rarely left alone. A sibling would be placed nearby to share heat. A grandmother's sleeve extended just far enough to touch the child's cheek. A small bell tied loosely to a cradle to warn of stirring. Sleep was shared, because warmth, like story, was meant to pass between people. In some homes, stories weren't whispered before bed. They were breathed into the blankets themselves. Mothers stitched prayers into hems. Fathers folded dream trinkets, tiny straw figures, dried clovers, even fingernail-sized carvings into the corners of sleeping cloths. If a child woke weeping, They were told, "Feel the thread, it remembers. Sleep now. You're not alone." There were no lullabies like ours, just low murmured blessings like the voice of earth beneath frost. Some say spirits walked most freely between midnight and first cockcrow. Sleeping in twos, then, was not just warmth, but defense. An old belief claimed that shadow things could not steal a soul if it lay too near another. A stolen spirit, it was said, had to drift alone. So the sleeping tangle of family was both habit, and magic. The grandmother in the back of the bed, the child curled at her spine, the mother draped like a guardian across them all, and nearest the door, the father, hearing everything. And what of sleep's content? Dreams in winter were said to be true dreams. When the soil rests, and the trees sleep, and the sky folds close, the body becomes receptive. A boy who dreamt of birds in winter might be gifted a feather in spring. A woman who saw bread in visions might bake something new next week. Some dreamt of those already gone, and spoke gently to them in the silence after first sleep, not out of fear, but as if continuing a dinner conversation across time. Waking meant returning. Sleep was never fully drifting. It was leaning against another world for a little while. In the coldest weeks, when daylight withdrew like a hurt animal, and the wind took on the pitch of morning, families remained in bed longer. Rising before dawn was cruel to the bones, so they stayed, talked, shared dreams, listened to the weather through walls, woven into silence that was not empty, but richly full of just being alive together. It was said that those who kept best silence at dawn would be blessed with an early spring. So people spoke only gently, if at all, during those sleepy hours. And still, some nights, the breath of warmth would leave. Fires forgotten, blankets too thin, a sudden chill stealing into the room as if carried by something unseen. And on those nights, old remedies returned. A heated brick wrapped in cloth, a rushlight burned just a little longer, a kettle of spiced ale shared between all, even the young. And always, always proximity. Nobody ever slept alone. Not in winter. Not unless illness or exile demanded it. Even the dying were laid beside another, if space allowed, so that their soul passed on with company. Elsa stirs in the dark. It's cold, damp from socks forgotten near the hearth. The child beside her has turned and placed a foot against her thigh. She smiles and does not move, just pulls the shared cloth over them both, traces the prayer stitch in the seam, mouths not a word, but offers one, all the same. They will all wake again before dawn. They will eat from the pot, dress in waking wool, boots, caps, layers. The fire will be stirred, the frost scraped from the inside of the windows with an old iron spoon. A song may be hummed if the night was kind, but for now it is second sleep. The air has stilled, the wind has moved on. Only breath remains, and something unseen wrapping softly around them, all like story, like warmth, like the deep, true cradle of winter itself. Bleak midwinter, surviving January's trial. There is a moment in winter, usually just after the feasting days have passed, and before the sky dares to hint at spring, when even the strongest among the villagers begin to go quiet. A kind of weariness settles in the bones, not despair. They knew this was coming, but the weight of endurance. This is the bleak midwinter, when the woodpile grows lean, when the rushes laid across the floor feel colder than the dirt they claim to soften, and when each new day begins not with hope, but with counting loaves, counting hours until sun. Window glass, if there is any, blurs thick with its breath. Doors creak at the hinges, swollen from snow. Counting coals. By now, the frost has become law. The walls of every hut, every church, every storage cellar are rimmed with it, and within every cottage, Fingers stay curled longer in the morning. Elsa wakes slower these days. She's been through more winters than anyone near her. But even she wraps her shawl tighter, stokes the fire earlier, holds the steam from the stew pot beneath her chin for a moment longer. "I remember winters colder than this one," she mumbles as the children doze. She always says that. No one believes her, but it makes them feel braver. January pulls no punches. The holiday bread is long eaten. The cheese is a rind in a linen wrap, shrinking by the day. Even the best ferments begin to run thin. Pickling barrels show bone beneath the rolling cabbage now. The pigs have been killed by now. No use keeping them through a season they can't survive in. No laughter beneath furs. Their meat hangs smoked in the eaves, but that too is rationed carefully, slice by slice. Even indulgence is quiet now. No feasts. Just quiet chewing around the hearth. Bowls licked not out of greed, spoons scraped clean, but because nothing must go to waste. Still, they do not weep. The villagers have no time for grief. They can't hold in both hands. Even now, even as snow presses up against doors and nights hang like shadowed veils across the land, they carry on. One woman spends her days spinning endlessly by the low light. She murmurs a song to keep her rhythm. Its words don't matter, only that it keeps her fingers moving, keeps numbness from the bone. One boy gathers late kindling. He returns once with a dead crow frozen mid-flight, wings sprawled like a story interrupted. They boil it anyway. It makes thin broth, but broth nonetheless. The ground is too hard to dig. Even the animals stay still. Chickens huddle in tight corners. Sheep crowd together for warmth, steaming like mist at dawn. The dog rarely leaves the hearth. They say even the foxes now fear the snow. Above, the moon hangs lower than it did in summer. A mute cawing in a sky made of old wool. Every breath feels heavier. Every limb wrapped in old garments now stiff with use. This is not the season of spectacle. This is the season of enduring small things. A single cup of warm ale. A story repeated for the 7th time, but smiled at just the same. A warm stone traded between cold hands in bed. A child, too restless to sleep, drawing holy symbols in the frost on the window, while whispering to ancestors whose names even their grandmother forgets. These are the victories of bleak midwinter. Elsa keeps her dried herb bag closer now. There's less in it than before, but still, thyme to ease the chest, sage to chase shadow dreams, crumbling mint, though it has long since lost its green. When a child begins to cough, she places a twist of the herbs into steaming water, lays a cloth over the bowl, and tells the child to breathe like the sun is returning. They do not know what she means, but they try, and sometimes they sleep well after. Two figures pressing their backs together as they sleep. A wheel of yarn passed from one cold hand to another. A mitten stitched at last light and gifted without ceremony. When the sun emerges, barely, weak and low, they place their poems into it. Not joking, not idle, just being remembered by the world. One afternoon, it's warm enough to open the door. The youngest child runs out squealing barefoot, only to leap back inside, howling. The others laugh. But Elsa places her feet at the threshold, looks to the ridge beyond the trees, and narrows her eyes. "Too soon yet," she whispers, and closes the door again. Those who can no longer rise remain by the fire. They are not seen as a burden. They are seen as keepers of flame. One elderly man, lost to memory, spends each evening muttering a chant that no one recognizes. He was a stonemason once, or a sailor, or perhaps nothing at all. But his rhythm is right, and the children echo it with their feet as they stomp warmth into their worn boots. He becomes music. By the 3rd week of deepest cold, ley lines are placed around the house. Small threads across doorposts. Ash drawn in circles near windows. Salt, if there's any left, placed placed in corners, not for beauty, for protection. Against what? Cold, madness, the loss of hope. The lines are reminders. This is our space. Nothing unwanted may enter, even if it already has. And then, one morning, a drip. First one, and another. The snow on the thatch drips. The youngest child shouts, reaching up toward the rafter. The melting drop catching on their small fingertip. Spring is coming, they yell. Of course, it may not be. Another frost might lie waiting. But for now, the hope is real enough to believe. Elsa smiles, but doesn't stand. She watches the child's eyes glowing and whispers to herself, "We made it past the bend," because that's what this time has always been. The bend in the river, the turn in the road, the bit of winter that tries to take more than cold can explain. But they are still here. The village, the people, the fire, the salt lines, the old songs, the sour bread still rising, even without feast. And beyond the door, a single crow calls out, not in mourning, but in witness. Mummers, myths, and midwinter fire in the longest repose of winter, just when the frost seems cured into the world like stone. A strange kind of hush settles. Not the hush of sleep or vigilance, but something more curious. Expectant, it lingers by the edge of the fields, just beneath the trees, beside the first melted groove in an icicle, as if the very land is listening. Not for danger, not for spring, but for something older, something wild and foolish. And good. The villagers call it many things. 12th night, the turning, Old Mask Day, or simply when the mummers come. It happens not on a fixed date, but when the soul cannot bear silence any longer, after midwinter's grip, after the salt has run low, the boots thinned, the dreams grown anxious. There comes a moment when sense must be surrendered for spirit. And so they celebrate, but not with fine robes or feasts of gold. The medieval peasant's celebration was stitched from scrap, and that made it sacred. Elsa recognizes the signs before anyone. A ribbon placed at the edge of the well. The smell of old lard heating in a pan before dawn. A mask hanging by someone's window. Crude, wooden, too big to be serious. And one morning, the children rise early, wide-eyed, excited. It's today, they whisper. They'll come. And the sweep of stories returning in living tongues. The mummers arrive from the next village. Or perhaps from no village at all. Some say they are just locals in disguise. Others swear they've never seen these walkers before, though their voices seem familiar. They come in masks, some carved from bark, others painted over with soot and lamb blood. A few are wrapped in cloth, with holes cut for eyes, lined with feathers, thistle, or stitched on coins. Terrifying if they didn't dance so comically. And that, of course, is the point. Each mummer takes a role. There is no script, not truly, just forms of a story. Village mythologies stitched from morsels of faith and pre-faith, dragged through generations by rhythm, rhyme, and pageantry. They parade through the streets, if they can be called streets, more like ruts between frozen cottage fronts. There is drumming, always drumming, not by instrument, always, sometimes just pots or sticks on logs. One carries a dead goat's skull on a pole. Another wears a crown made of woven bread. The fool trips over himself and chases chickens. And the villagers? They follow. They laugh. They join. Because to deny them, entry is to invite bad luck. Because nonsense, in winter, is a powerful medicine. The mummers always perform. In the old square, near the stone with no name, or beside the ruined chapel wall that leans left as if to listen. They reenact something. A battle, a resurrection, a silly wedding, a fight between summer and winter, a giant who loses to a pig, then a sudden return to life. The beaten rises, The dead stands. A new season is promised. Bread thrown into the circle. Ale poured from clay mugs. It makes no sense. But then again, neither does winter. So the villagers receive it with open hearts. Later, the fire is lit outside, not in hearth or oven, but the old way. Midwinter fire. Logs too big for domestic use are rolled to the center of the green, stacked and not with holy water, but with cheer. Children light them if they can. Or the man who never speaks lights it once a year and bows his head only to flames. The fire roars, louder than song, louder than the wolves. Its smoke curling into a sky still unwilling to blue. It is not heat, exactly, that matters, but witness. The flame rises, and the villagers shout in rhythm.
And eyes watch it melt, and hearts dare to hold. Elsa wraps a shawl tighter as she watches. She has not worn a mask since her mother died, but she lets a child place charcoal on her cheeks and swirling lines. Anyway, she's a crone spirit now. Someone jokes lovingly. Elsa just nods. She's always been a little bit, spirit. The village returns, too quiet after ash. Smolder. Leftover bread is tucked into a basket. Children argue in drowsy tones over who will wear the widow's veil tomorrow. And someone finds the saint's mask strung from the tree by the well, turning slowly in the wind. Watching, listening, remembering. 4 days after, the laughter lingers like the scent of smoke and wool. People hum more freely. The children draw much-lambed beasts in the windows that never existed. One boy insists he saw the bear spirit at the treeland, blessing the field with a paw raised high. The adults say nothing. Why interrupt joy with skepticism? And in the kitchens, songs sneak back. Work songs, silly reels, rude rhymes about last year's cheese exploding in the barn. Even soup tastes sweeter. Even the long shadow cast by January's late moon seems easier to walk through because, brief as it was, gave them oxygen. They don't call it survival. They don't call it a ritual. They just call it living. The way bones creak, the way joy shivers back into the way some masks are left by the door a few extra days, just in case something else wants to wear them. Across every culture that endured a hard winter, there came this season, a foolish season, a sacred season, a time to say, we know the dark is longer now, but we are still dancing. Even the animals sense it. Sheep grow restless. Goats beg for more. The hens cluck melodically as though remembering something bright. And in the quiet heart of night, as fire fades and straw shifts, Elsa hears music again. Not outside, but inward. Some old rhythm. The mummer's beat, carried home in the ribs. And she smiles. Because not everything survives winter to end it. Some things survive just enough to remind you of what comes next. A flame, a mask, a rhyme, a laugh. Let it come. Let it dance. Let it burn until the dark forgets itself, if only for a minute.
What the cold remembered in time. Even the snow stops falling. Not all at once, but slowly, as though winter itself were forgetting its reasons. The drifts flatten. The icicles shrink. That endless white sky flickers the faintest hint of blue. And somewhere at the edge of the rye field, surrounded by bowed trees and fences crusted with windswept frost, someone says at first, I think it's beginning to turn. But before the earth blooms, before the birds fill the hedges again, before the doorway dew smells green instead of cold, something happens that is harder to mark. The old remembering begins. Winter does not leave without leaving something behind. It leaves in the bones, in the way people bend as they walk, in the sound of a kettle simmering too long, in the way a grandmother sighs 3 times before getting out of bed. But most of all, it lingers in stories, not written, not carved, not even sung all the time, just told, at table corners, by hearths, between sips of thin broth, into the soft ears of children, whose faces still hold the roundness of sleep. Elsa keeps the memory box at the back of her shelf, beneath 2 loaves that have gone too hard to slice. Inside, not relics, just words, quiet ones. She opens it each spring, in her mind, not truly with her hands, and pulls out the tales Winter told her when the night was deepest. "You listen better when it's cold," she says aloud to no one. And oh, how true that is. It's said that winter remembers the things we forget, where tools were left, which child stole the better mitten, which neighbor didn't share his ale when the frost killed the barley. But winter remembers more, like how to wait, how to mend, how to cure hunger not with food, but with time and laughter and silence shared. Lessons frozen into the folds of daily life. Lessons whispered slowly, so they thaw only when needed. A boy asked once, "Why is it that people speak slower in winter?" And Elsa answered, "Because the words take longer to warm before they enter the world." There are other things the cold keeps safe. Old names, of paths once walked, of saints never canonized, of beasts that don't exist anymore, but whose roles in stories remain unquestioned. In one tale, a woman turns into a wren and hides in the snow until her heart forgets its sorrow. In another, a candle left lit overnight sings lullabies to keep death outside the doorframe. Children do not ask if the stories are true. They ask, "Did it happen here?" And the elders always say yes, even if here means anywhere the cold still listens. The woodpile tells stories too. Every log has a sound when cracked. Some ring with pitch, some groan like bones. That log from the ash tree struck by lightning? It was said to make the fire speak in tongues. The pine log split on St. Matthias's Day? It boiled water twice as fast. No one knew why, but no one questioned it. The cold makes people attentive to things others would miss. For what is superstition, if not just an older kind of observation? Elsa tells the children, "Every knot in your woolen cap is a winter survived." They count them proudly. 13 on one, 4 on another. One so old, the wool has faded to memory. Threads become milestones, stitches, the ink of oral history. No parchment needed, just fingers, counting quietly beside a fire that refuses to go out. Some stories aren't told aloud. They're remembered in acts, like walking 3 steps backward into the house after seeing fox tracks, or boiling nettle in the first soup of March to ensure the stomach forgets bareness, or stirring the morning porridge clockwise, then widdershins just once, to honor both the saints and the ancient circle of seasons. No one asks why. They simply perform the motion, the same way their mothers once did, and their grandmothers before them. Because winter doesn't only eat food, it eats purpose, joy, and certainty. These rituals feed back what the cold tries to steal. And of course, there are the silences, the things not ever spoken, the child whose cough never returned after Candlemas, the man who walked into the snow last Epiphany and never came back, the lamb born too early and buried beneath the chapel stone unnamed. These are cold's own stories. No embellishment, no rhyme, and they are kept softer than any song, remembered in candles lit on quiet nights, in bowls left full on windowsills during the first thaw, in eyes that glance toward the woods at dusk, just to be sure. At the end of the worst winters, some say, the wind changes voice. It stops sounding like ice, starts sounding familiar. One evening, as Elsa gathers her shawl, the air through the chimney sighs, not just whistling, but humming, almost as if a lullaby is returning. And she pauses, listens, smiles. "Ah," she says, "she's giving us back our songs." In some cultures, winter is a courtroom. Each mistake made in warmth must be paid for in frost. But in this village, winter is an elder, stooped, mysterious, sometimes cruel, but always teaching, always testing. And if you pass the test, if the fire keeps, if the bread lasts till thaw, if the stories are remembered, she smiles and steps aside. One morning, 2 crows land on the thatch. They poke at each other, feathers puffed, then leap up together, spiraling toward the oak. The children watch from indoors, breath fogging the glass. They squint as one of the crows holding a stem of straw. Nest, someone whispers. It begins. That night, Elsa tells a different story. Not of saints or spirits or sorrow, but of green things, of seed pods held tightly in earth, of flowers drunk with snowmelt, of how birds forget the cold on purpose, so they may teach others that life wasn't always this hard. The children lean against each other, eyes soft, mouths open slightly as if halfway into sleep. The cold they will remember. But not only the cold, they will remember the cozy crush of bodies waiting for second sleep, the taste of sour barley warmed at dusk, the mummers' songs, the saint's mask turning in wind, the weight of a lap filled with wool, the rumble of a fire that never quite gave up, and smoke rising, always rising, into air too still to carry it far, but far enough. Winter is not gone yet, but it's grown tired, like a lullaby near its final verse. Its teeth are duller, its winds less sharp. The bell over the chapel tolls with a deeper echo, and somewhere, underground but certain, roots are listening. When spring touched the window latch, there comes a morning so ordinary that no one is sure at first if it means anything at all. The sky is the same pale gray. The hearth is still warm from the early fire. The water in the bucket still bites at the hands. But then you hear it, a creak at the window, a sound like someone has touched the latch from outside. There's no one there, of course. Only the breeze, softer than before, carrying a scent like wet moss and something green, though no green is yet in sight. Still, you know, it's beginning. In the small village tucked between the woods and the frozen brook, winter has never left cleanly or quietly. It lingers in the wood smoke, in the layers of wool still tied at the wrist. In the way, people walk with careful steps, unsure if the path will hold or crack underfoot. But now, even ELS, old as the oldest rafter in the roof, pauses with her hand near the shutter, nose turned toward this new scent in the air. It isn't warm exactly, but it smells like hope. Spring does not arrive like a storm. It arrives in gestures. A single crocus pushing through old snow. The drip-drip of icicles softening into rhythm. A hen's egg found, bright and unexpected, nestled between 2 old planks. The first time in weeks, a pipe of smoke curls from the blacksmith's chimney. Not for warmth, but for work. These are signs. Silence is beginning to sing again. Someone waves in the distance, not for a reason, just because they're glad to be outside again. Children kick at old snowbanks until their feet drip into the grass below. Goats begin to butt heads, playfully, as if remembering their strength. And someone, somewhere, taps the side of a fence post with a stone, just to make a bit of noise. Because spring isn't noise itself. It is the space where noise is welcome again. Elsa opens the shutters fully, lets the light touch the stone floor. It settles in unevenly. No grand beam from heaven, just a warm glow where the dust floats differently. She sighs and smiles. The bread rises more quickly now. That old sourdough starter, tired and thin after the long haul through January's famine of flour, bubbles with new life. There's time and heat now to feed it. Time to care. Time to bake something other than survival. Today's loaf will have rosemary? Fresh? Not yet, but dried from the summer past, wrapped in a cloth, kept near the chimney. She brushes the top with water, traces a cross across it with her finger. Less prayer, more thank you. Then lets it rise in a sunbeam. And what becomes of the hearth, now that spring knocks? It still burns, but slower. Logs last longer. The children don't crowd so close. There's room now for play between the fire's edge and the outer air. The door can stay cracked. And they let the smoke out, not just to clear the room, but to watch it curl upward, higher, into a sky that no longer holds snow. A neighbor appears at Elsa's door. He carries a jar of something green, bright, acidic, hard to name unless you knew the pickling was done last summer in pepperleaf and nettle. He says nothing, just nods once, leaves the jar. No thanks needed. It's spring again. Sharing is automatic. And what of the midwinter fire ash? The remains of the mummer's light? Sometime soon, they'll take it in small handfuls, one for each garden bed. Not science, not folklore, just trust. The idea that flame that kept them through frost may keep the roots company beneath wet dirt. A heat remembered, even below the ground. Elsa walks to the tree near the edge of the rye field. There, tied around the trunk, is the wreath she placed on the first frost. It is mostly brown now, frayed, hung low by wind and snow, but still whole. She unties it, carries it home quietly. It will become compost, food for something not yet born. Sometimes spring hurts. The sunlight reveals. All winter, the cracks were hidden in shadows. Now the worn slats of wood show more clearly. The roof's gaps leak light along with the air. The faces once hidden in candlelight now show wrinkles missed in the long cold. But no one mourns this too loudly, because spring, even unwelcome in parts, is truth, and truth brings seeds. It rains now, not snow, not sleet, but true rain. It lands softly on soil, on cloaks, in the cups of last year's husks lying open in the earth. Children dance in it without coats. They will catch colds, but they do not care. Coughs are part of awakening. They'll be soothed with time and laughs. And of those who didn't last the winter? Oh yes, there is always one chair less. A blanket folded on a shelf, whose owner no longer wraps it round their knees. A dog curled beneath a bench, waiting for someone they will not see again. Spring does not erase absence, but it brightens the room enough so we can remember it gently. Elsa sets an extra bowl on the table anyway, just for a few more nights, just until the birds return for good. And they do. The birds. Just first, just one, then two, then an entire quarrelsome choir on the old chapel roof, declaring territory as though it were July already. Their music is messy, vibrant, impatient, perfect. That night, Elsa gathers the youngest child into her lap. The fire is low. There is no urgency now. The child asks, as all children do, "Will the cold come back?" And she considers before answering. Of course. Will it be as bad? Maybe worse. Maybe kinder. The child frowns. Then what do we do? Elsa nods and under her breath replies, "We remember what warmed us this time." They sit together. That is warmth. That is enough. Outside, across the village, the shutters creak. But not with wind. With ease. Old wood being reminded that it's meant to move, that it was made to open again, not just to close. Ashes are swept. Floors are washed. A shawl is hung on a peg, no longer needed for sleep. Bread is broken twice, once for eating, once for offering. And somewhere, beyond the field, beneath trees still bare but listening, the earth shifts. Not vastly, just enough. Just one seed's worth of green. Winter has not been defeated, only released, sent on its way with thanks, with full bellies or nearly full, with tired arms and whole stories. And in its place, not spring exactly, but that most magical hour between seasons, when everything is memory, and everything is about to begin again. And so, the frost is melted, the shutters have opened, the pots are washed, and the last ember, has winked its quiet farewell beneath the hearth. If you've stayed with us through the long dark, sharing stories, breaking ghost bread, tracing frost with fingertips, then you've journeyed not only through winter, but through time itself. Because even centuries ago, in quiet villages forgotten by maps, people just like us gathered around fires, told stories, shared blankets, and waited for warmth to return. And perhaps that's why you're here now. Not just for sleep, not just for history, but for something quieter, companionship, ritual, comfort. And if tonight you found even a little of that, then the old ways are not forgotten. Not yet. If this story warmed you, even gently, I invite you to linger a little longer. Subscribe so you don't miss the next quiet tale. Leave a comment. Tell me something your winter remembers. And if you'd like to support fires like these, you'll find a candle for tipping in the description. This channel is made as a place to rest in, where stories stretch their limbs and time slows down.